No man is an island, entire of itself. Every man is a piece of the continent, a part of the main. If a clod be washed away by the sea, Europe is the less. As well as if a promontory were, as well as if a manor of thine friends, or of thine own were. Any man's death diminishes me, because I am involved in mankind, and therefore never sin to know for whom the bell tolls. It tolls for thee. This poem is taken from a larger work of prose by John Donne in the 17th century as he reflected on his beliefs concerning the interconnectedness of mankind. That just as a piece of dirt being washed away into the ocean reduces the total landmass of a continent, so too does the death of a single individual diminishes the whole of mankind, as we are deprived of that person's unique experiences, their knowledge, and their perspectives. Beyond such insights, it's an interesting poem as it contains two famous lines that many, if not most people, would recognize. However, I doubt that many would realize both lines come from the same piece of work. Namely, "Ask not for whom the bell tolls, it tolls for thee," and "No man is an island." I believe the profound truth of this second phrase can readily be seen in the sheer number of individuals it takes to make a movie. Without stagehands or someone doing their work, sets would go bare. Without sound technicians, who would give the lightsabers distinctive hum? Lighting, wardrobe, mic placement, special effects, pyrotechnicians, writers, the list goes on. And the one responsible for wrangling this herd of cats? The director. In terms of power over the course of a movie, few people involved have as much raw control as the director does. The director can often make changes to the script. The director is responsible for taking the scenes on a storyboard and bringing them to life. The director tells the actors where to stand, how to act. The director tells where he wants the lighting to fall and how the cameraman is to position himself to get the frame for the shot. Often, the director oversees the editing of a movie, if they're not the ones doing the editing entirely. Truly, there is no one more influential in determining how a movie will turn out than the director. Or, at least on paper, no one is more influential than the director. In reality, however, often there are much more influential individuals. A producer, for example, might be in charge of hiring casts long before a director is ever picked out. With film houses, the president or board of directors can fire and replace directors even in the middle of shooting. Entire movies can be canceled. Film houses can be subsidiaries to other companies and ultimately answerable to their board of directors or presidents. And above them all sit lawyers, legions of lawyers ready to frivolously litigate away millions just to earn their company thousands. Now fortunately, as part of the acquisition of Lucasfilm for $4 billion, Disney also acquired the various branches of Lucasfilm, such as the animation department, consumer products, that's the right to make toys, t-shirts, and basically print dollar bills, Skywalker Sound, and Industrial Light and Magic. As a result, Disney owns the rights to use all the names, the imagery, the props, the outfits from the existing movies and TV shows. At the time that The Last Jedi was being produced, the only Star Wars rights Disney didn't own were the distribution rights for the first 6 movies. Those were owned by Fox until the year 2020, when 5 of the 6 would be handed over to Disney. The last one, A New Hope, will be owned by Fox in perpetuity. Of course, since then, Disney has bought out Fox, so for fans of this new saga, you should have high hopes that you'll get a Skywalker Complete Saga box set for Christmas next year. With so much of this looking right on paper, how then did we get such a divisive movie?
It's much more exciting to me when you get, a group of people who are like coming up to you and really, really excited about it. And then there are other people who walk out literally saying that was the worst movie I've ever seen.
If it wasn't completely Johnson's fault, then whose was it? Well, thank you for asking, imaginary YouTuber. There is a low-hanging fruit answer of it being Kathleen Kennedy's fault. But the truth of the matter is, we don't know how much of control Disney has over Lucasfilm. For example, Lucasfilm had to get permission from Disney prior to killing Han Solo. However, other subsidiaries of Disney, such as Marvel or Pixar, have also claimed that Disney gives them a lot of freedom. Almost unlimited freedom. Since I can't definitively say who's at fault for any given decision, and I do try to be as fair and unbiased as possible, rather than assigning blame, I'm going to focus on what issues came together to make this movie the problem child that it was. In fact, I think I can boil down the factors external to Rian Johnson to one single overarching issue: a complete and utter lack of foresight. When Disney acquired Lucasfilm at the very end of 2012, the ink barely had time to dry on the contract before they announced that they were going to be releasing a Star Wars film every year starting at the end of 2015. That effectively meant they only had 2 short years to write, cast, shoot, edit, and all the myriad of other fine details that have to be accomplished in the process of creating a film prior to the release of their first film. While daunting, that's not an impossible task, especially since as part of the purchase, George Lucas had handed over the outlines he had made for his final trilogy. Except Lucasfilm, now under the control of Kathleen Kennedy and Disney, scraped every last idea from the outlines and went in an entirely different direction. Something that Bob Iger has noted in his recent memoir, The Ride of a Lifetime, Lessons Learned from 15 Years as CEO of the Walt Disney Company, made George Lucas felt betrayed. Which honestly goes to show that a gentleman's agreement and $1.50 will still only get you a cup of coffee at McDonald's. Now, I am not saying we would have necessarily gotten a better movie with George at the helm. So far, no one knows what those outlines contained, and since Disney now owns the rights to those outlines, I doubt we'll ever know. What I am saying is that this move showed an incredible lack of foresight. Disney was out to get the money they had just spent back, and to get it back immediately. I certainly understand their mindset. After all, they had just dropped $4 billion to get Lucasfilm. That's more than the GDP for 30 out of 193 nations, as recorded by the CIA. And as we all know,
there's only one business in the galaxy that'll get you this rich.
War.
So clearly, one of Disney's subsidiaries must be a weapons dealer. Anyways, I suspect that what happened here is that Disney had purchased Marvel back in 2009 for $4 billion, and Pixar in 2006 for $8 billion, and in both cases saw an immediate return on their investment. Knowing that Star Wars has a huge fan base, they expected the same kind of immediate return. But just a modicum of foresight should have tipped them off that these were widely different situations. In Marvel's case, even though the only movies released by 2009 had been Iron Man and The Incredible Hulk, with Iron Man 2 then currently being filmed, it still had the clear vision of Kevin Feige providing a framework for the films to work within, and had already specifically planned out the next several movies. Likewise with Pixar, while its movies don't share an overarching universe, unless they actually do, they did have a wealth of movies queued up and ready to be produced. With the removal of Lucas outlines, however, Lucasfilm had nothing. It had props and character designs, sure, but it had no substance. And as a result, there was a mad dash to get everything going all at once, without taking the time to stop and figure out if the choices were the right ones. Just consider the unfortunate fates of Phil Lord, Chris Miller, Colin Trevorrow, Josh Trank, and Gareth Edwards. In a span from around the middle of 2016 to the middle of 2017, Lucasfilm fired 5 directors, 3 of whom were in the middle of filming and had to be replaced, and the last was fired after writing several versions of the Episode 9 script. And just as a side note here, while I was in the middle of recording this, it was announced that David Benioff and D.B. Weiss will not have a trilogy in the Star Wars universe anymore. While it is currently being claimed that they chose to leave to be able to focus on their Netflix show Deadline, we'll have to wait and see if Lucasfilm doesn't release yet another Creative Differences press release in the near future. This brings the turnover rate to a staggering 8 directors. While it's not unheard of to fire a director from a film, it is a rare thing to fire them in the middle of filming, and practically unheard of to burn through 5 directors in a year. Technically 6 if you believe that Rian Johnson was going to direct Episode 9 or that he has lost his own trilogy. But what is truly tragic is that all this could have been avoided with just a single moment's worth of foresight. In each director's firing, the official stance was always something to the tune of parting ways due to creative differences. And while there are enough behind-the-scenes accounts of directors rubbing Kathleen Kennedy the wrong way to hold some credibility, let's take this statement on face value. Why did you have creative differences with the directors in the first place? In Lord and Miller's case, it was because their directing style allowed for too much improvisation. They kept going off script, and it infuriated the powers that be. However, that was their well-known directing style. There should have been no surprise that directors known for improvisation tried to let the crew improvise. Likewise, with Gareth Edwards, the only 2 movies he had done prior to Rogue One were dark and gritty fighting movies, so it should have come as no surprise that that's the direction he would have taken Rogue One. And if I can spot this is going to be an issue, how could Disney and Lucasfilm miss it? Well, it's because they didn't look for it. They grabbed directors coming off of big hits, and with only 3 films with them as directors to their names, and called it a day. They didn't care about how these directors ended up making such monumental successes, in terms of earnings at least. All they did was grab directors who made well-grossing films and assumed they would be able to do the same for Star Wars without considering how they would fit the culture that they wanted for Lucasfilm. But honestly, they didn't have time to consider how any given director would fit in with the company. And I believe this is where their lack of foresight resulted in the largest damage to the franchise. No one really had the appropriate time to plan anything out. Johnson was set up to fail from the moment he took the job. Creative differences aside, at least Lord and Miller and Edwards and Trank all had fighting chances to create good standalone movies. Likewise, J.J. Abrams had a fighting chance to make a good first entry to the new trilogy. For each one of these directors, they were given a largely blank slate to work with. All they had to do was make a movie that could fit within the Star Wars framework. Even with Solo and Rogue One as prequels, all they had to do was make a unique movie and drop in a couple of references to link to later events and they'd be golden. Of course, they still managed to botch that up, but hey, at least they had a fighting chance.
Solo?
Johnson had no chance. Johnson was told he could take the trilogy anywhere he wanted, and all he had to do was make sure he picked up where 7 left off. Growing up, every 3-day weekend and at some point during the summer, my dad would load up the family and begin the 8-hour drive up to northwest Arkansas to visit family. Every so often, we'd get to ride with our cousins who lived nearby and we'd play a story writing game. Don't judge, we didn't have iPads or built-in entertainment systems back then. The way you played is each person would take a turn writing a single paragraph, with the next person picking up where the other person left off. And at some point, someone would get tired and would just end the story. Reading it back was hilarious. Sure, there would be some sort of larger story you could more or less see as you read it, but it was more like a mad gap. Nothing made sense. There'd be massive tonal shifts. Characters would be forgotten or randomly replaced, and once a cow showed up just to put an abrupt end to everything. It was fun for kids wasting time in a car, but it is not a winning strategy for creating what are supposed to be interconnected movies. How are you supposed to leave room for the next movie to develop if you have no idea what the next movie is going to do? What sort of revelations should you hint at, and which ones should you reveal? How should any specific character be acting at any given point of time? It's impossible to answer these questions, as all you have to work with is, and then Rey reaches out to hand the lightsaber to Luke. Okay, so maybe that last sentence is an exaggeration. Daisy Ridley has gone on record saying that Abrams sent Johnson tons of notes. She thought they were about where Abrams was planning for the movies to go, but Johnson later clarified that they were just notes about what was happening in The Force Awakens. Notes that he would desperately need as he was writing the script for Episode 8 before Episode 7 was ever completed. For all the reasons that I'll be critiquing Johnson in these videos to come, this is the only point that truly makes me feel sympathetic for him. Yes, Johnson was arrogant. He was pompous. He failed to listen to veteran actors and to the many notes that J.J. Abrams sent him. But even if he had been more humble, even if he had been paying attention to the notes J.J. Abrams sent him, Johnson was set up to fail by either Kathleen Kennedy or Bob Iger. Through their utter lack of foresight, they failed to plan ahead, counting on the blind following of Star Wars fans to happily lap up whatever drivel they vomited up for us as they released a movie every year without any structure, without any consideration of what the story was actually supposed to be. Well, I say no structure, however, there was one thing that Kathleen Kennedy was committed to these movies having. But that's going to have to wait until much, much later before we talk about it. George Lucas once said, "I really enjoy editing the most. It's the part I have the most control over. It's the part I can deal with the easiest. It is the part I rely on the most to save things, for better or worse. Everybody has their ace in the hole. Mine is editing. I disagree with him though. I think the reason Star Wars has reached such monumental heights is not because of the editing of them, but because of the team that came together to make these first 3 movies. Had Lucas not listened to the advice of that team, we may have never gotten past that first movie. And what a loss that would have been. How many stories would we have lost? Unfortunately, Johnson did not follow Lucas's example. So let's start to take a look at what Johnson did and how we could have potentially resolved these issues and produced a superior film.